Hello. In this video, I'm going to take you through the process of designing my latest paper puppet, which, as I hope you can see, is a dinosaur. Welcome along. My name is Ben Stanley and I design and create paper-based working replicas of beloved Muppets, puppets, characters and creatures. So if papercraft's your thing, or you just like what you see, I'd really appreciate it if you gave this video a thumbs up. So, creating a dinosaur puppet was a bit of a departure for me. Most of the puppets that I've designed to date are kind of face focused, whereas this is very much about the body and the body movement. And so it was a different set of challenges. Really when I started, all I knew is that I wanted to more or less base it on a velociraptor. I'm not calling it a velociraptor because it's not really anatomically correct, but that was my starting point. And I wanted the mouth to open and close. I wanted obviously the legs to move it around, and I wanted a nice swishy tail. So I started with the tail because it was the most interesting bit to me, because it was quite a big challenge to be able to sort of create something that could be fluid and moving but also look like a tail. And my starting point was a sort of fairly traditional way of doing that I've seen a number of times with different puppeteers, where you create this little funnel and it's got sections on it and there's gaps in these sections, and it gives a nice movement. There's two things that I wanted to do to try and improve it. I wanted to taper it down to an end, but also I don't love these gaps. So I came up with the idea of filling these gaps internally. So before you put the outside section, you would put these little seesaws in the middle, and they kind of glue to the very central sort of section, and they can kind of tilt left and right on the very edge of that, and they would go underneath. So because they sort of taper off into circles, it allows the paper above it, which is wrapping around, to be able to kind of just move a little bit, not a massive amount, but it moves enough backwards and forwards to allow the movement of the tail. And then because you've now filled in the gap, it looks a lot more like a solid tail, but it's still got that movement. So then the next thing was the body, and for this section I did a similar thing which I'd done for the first time with my Stitch puppet. And what I did is I took a front and side elevation of a dinosaur and I cut that out, and then I sort of built up a sort of 3D almost skeleton with cardboard, and then I covered that cardboard with masking tape all the way around. Then I worked out a bit like a dress pattern, I guess, where would be the best place to cut it, so that when you peeled it off the cardboard skeleton, you could flatten it out. So then that kind of gives you a sense of what two-dimensional shape could wrap around to become quite a similar three-dimensional shape. So that was the process to create the body, which is relatively straightforward to do. So the next thing that I tackled was the head, and this really was about just getting that jaw to open and close. And obviously it's quite a small puppet, so there was no way that I was going to be able to use my fingers. I had to come up with a mechanism that would allow me to open and close the mouth from somewhere else further down the body that was more accessible. So this mechanism would open and close the mouth quite well, and also allowed me this strip of paper that could go for quite a long distance and allow me to manipulate it from the end of that strip of paper. And the first thought that I had was that I would give the dinosaur a collar, and I would have like sort of a rod that if you had a dangerous animal, you would put the loop over the head, and you'd have a sort of sturdy rod to be able to keep it away from you. And then I could turn the rod clockwise or anti-clockwise, and by doing that would open and close the mouth. But it just didn't look great, and also you actually can't take the weight of the dinosaur on that rod and turn it around to open and close it, so it just didn't really work. So in the end, I kind of just took inspiration from, where do you have the mechanism, where do your hand go in every puppet, kind of, goes up the rear end. And I thought, okay, well, actually, maybe I could just have something coming out at the bottom, because my hands are going to be down there for the feet anyway. So that's what I ended up doing, having this mechanism run down from the mouth all the way down inside the body and out at the end. So with the legs, we've got a couple of considerations. Firstly is how we're going to attach them to the body, and then how we're going to make the joints so that the different sections of the legs, the knee joint and the ankle joint and the hip joint, can all move, and then how we're actually going to attach our fingers in order to be able to manipulate the legs. And so a decision I made quite early on is that, unlike for instance with my Stitch puppet where I would attach the legs using paper fasteners, with this one I did more like I did with Stitch's arms actually, which had a sort of a bolt running through the centre of the body, attaching the two together. And actually I worked out a system with this slightly different from Stitch, where I sort of put one tube inside another, and then one was slightly longer, and that would basically allow them to fix into place as well as be able to move separately from each other. So one would spin around inside the other one, and that worked out really nicely and also gave the dinosaur a bit more strength as well. The next thing was the joints, and again with the joints I looked to the work I'd already done with my Stitch puppet, and what I'd used there is these sort of little barrels of paper. I sort of did a slightly different design on those, but they became sort of linchpins almost in a movement where that one leg would loop around this little mini barrel, and then the other leg would attach at the two ends, so then you could sort of move them around the fulcrum as it were. And I used that in both the knee and the ankle joints. And then, as I say, the final bit of the puzzle there was really about how am I going to get my fingers to move the feet around. And for that, originally I had my fingers right in the feet, but actually what I remembered was how I'd actually created the mouth opening and closing on my Sonic the Hedgehog puppet. And for that, I'd created a little tube that went onto my finger, and then it flattened out at the end, and then it bent, and then that would allow the mouth to open and close. And in this case, that would fix in at the very bottom of the feet and then allow the foot to move. And also, again, there's quite a nice sort of lever effect there, which gives a bit of freedom to the foot. So putting all those three things together, I came up with quite a nice little mechanism. I guess the biggest limitation in terms of the way that the feet move is really the limitations of the size of our hand and how far you can stretch one finger away from the other. So I've used, rather than the middle finger, I've used my index finger and ring finger, and they can move so far, but it's actually quite an awkward movement, especially if you're walking forward. So the dinosaur is limited to relatively small steps. In a way, they're almost more up and down rather than forward. So having done the legs, the next thing was the arms. And really this was relatively straightforward because the top of the arms were made, the basically miniatures of the top of the legs, made in exactly the same way. They even connect in the same way, although rather than having two rods, one inside the other, on the arms you only need one rod there, because I don't really want them to move. I want them to stay where they are, so they're going to be glued in place, but it's still worth having that rod of paper rolled up in the middle to, again, give extra strength to the body. And then the final piece of the puzzle was really just how I was going to hold the weight of the dinosaur. Because when I designed the whole thing, I sort of made the legs, I had the body, and I was like, yeah, brilliant, it's there. And then I tried it, and yeah, I could move the legs, but the body was just sort of flopping forward or flopping back. There was no control. And as I said, I'd thought about using this sort of collar idea, but that wasn't going to take the weight. So I realised actually the back of the puppet was the best place to hold the weight. And again, I sort of thought, okay, so I'm using a paperclip to trigger the mouth to open and close. So I thought, well, okay, I'll straighten out a few more paper clips and I'll put them in there and I'll hold the weight from underneath. And again, the great thing about that is that you've got the hands moving the puppet at the back. So this is just adding an extra hand at the back so that you're not really interfering with the rest of the puppet as it's moving. So that's how I designed this dinosaur puppet. Thanks so much for watching. Hope it's given you a bit of insight. I'm going to be creating a video showing you how to make it step by step. So if you want to try that, look out for that video when it comes out. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye bye.